Brought to you by our exclusive fabric partners. Be sure to look for their newest lines of fabric.
Welcome to Quiltmaker's Block Network. I'm Diane Harris with Quiltmaker, and today we're going to make star checks, block number 98 from Quiltmaker's 100 Blocks Volume 1. This block was designed by Sue Garman. To make the star checks block, you'll need a variety of purples, and you'll need a background fabric. So notice in the purples that there's a real range of the things that'll work. I kept them to mediums and darks so that they'll all show up against the background, but you can see that there are some that are more reddish purple and some that are more bluish purple, and you really need that variety to make the block interesting. Everything you'll need to make this block is listed on the right-hand side of your screen, so if you'd like to jot those down, you can pause the video now. So here is how the center section of this block goes together. All of these patches are cut 1.5 inch square, except for these rectangles, 1.5 by 2.5 for those. So in the corners, you'll make little 4 patches by joining like so. So you have 1 in each corner, and you want to pay attention to the orientation. The dark patches kind of point towards the corners each time. And in the center, you'll sew 4 of the purples together. And then each of these rows comes together like so. This scoots over here, and then the center row comes together. And this one I've already joined. And then the 3 rows come together. When I made this block, I was reminded of something in patchwork that it's easy to forget if you're making a simple block. And that is that you really want to pay attention to how your squares are ending up. When I went to sew my first center section to the outer portion that kind of forms the star, my center section was not fitting well at all. And so it's really not a matter of measuring your seam allowance. You can measure your seam allowance and it can be right on. What's really important is to measure how this unit is coming out. So this needs to be 2.5 inches, and so as you sew, you need to measure, is this coming out to be 2.5 inches? If you're off by just 2 or 3 threads on each one of these, by the time you sew the 3 of them together and get all the way down here, you're 1/4 or 3/8 of an inch off, which is really hard to recover from. So as you go, this needs to measure 2.5. And then when you've sewn 2 together, like so, this needs to measure 4.5. And then when you get down here, this needs to measure 6.5. So you need to check as you're going and adjust your seam allowance accordingly. So you'll want to make 12 half square triangles using the half square triangle method, or Quiltmaker calls it triangle squares. If you have another method that you prefer, you can certainly use that. So it takes 12 all together, and they're laid out like this. So here at the top, you'll want to make a row like this. The center portion looks like the star points, and then in the corners, the dark purples go towards the corners. These 2 are joined on each side. Again, they form the star points. And then those are connected to the center section that we just created. And you have another row down here. So then this row gets joined to the center and this row to the center. So here we have the scrappy star checks block all joined together. And I talked earlier a little bit about how you want to use some purples that are more bluish and some purples that are more reddish. These are slightly lighter, but there's still quite a bit of contrast between all of the purples and the background. And I wanted to show you what happens if you use too many patches that don't have enough contrast with the background. If you're making a whole quilt, you kind of want to start out and make blocks with lots of contrast so that everything shows up real well. And then what you can do is sprinkle in a few blocks that have lower contrast, but if you have a lot of blocks, for instance, that used these fabrics, you start to lose that star shape. Another thing I wanted to show you is a fabric like this. It's an adorable fabric. It has little castles on it, but it's got areas of very dark and very light, and these tend to be really hard fabrics to use successfully. So if you're a beginner, these are fabrics to maybe think carefully about or seek some advice at your local quilt shop as to how to use those most successfully. So to make sure that your block stands out, be sure to use fabrics that have plenty of contrast. And that just means, can you actually see the difference between the background fabric and the star fabric? Make sure there's plenty of contrast, that these are darker than the background. Here's another version of the block I made using all different pinks. I thought it would make a really cute little girl quilt. And you'll notice on this one that instead of having the dark fabric in these positions, I put light fabrics here and put a dark hot pink in these positions. So I reversed the values in this center section, and it makes it kind of interesting. The other thing to notice, if you're interested in making scrap quilts, is that I didn't use just one shade of pink. I used lots of different ones. Here's something that's real peachy. Here's a real soft baby pink. There's another peachy one. And over here's a pink that has more blue in it, so it has almost a raspberry feel to it. So all those different shades of pink are what makes this block really interesting and helps to hold someone's gaze on your quilt. The other thing I wanted to show you is this is the first block I made, and as you can see, if you look closely right here, my center section was not fitting well with my star points. And that's because I did not take the time to measure as I went, and things were not coming out real well here in the center. So again, it's important to measure how your units are coming out as you sew, and then adjust your seam allowance accordingly. This block might be my favorite of all the versions that I made. I just went totally scrappy. I used mediums and darks in all different colors and all different moods. We have happy fabrics, we have elegant fabrics, we have a batik, here's an Asian batik, just a whole variety of things. The only thing I paid attention to was that I had plenty of contrast between the fabrics and the white background. So this would make a great quilt, really scrapped up with lots of different fabrics from your scrap bin. So I wanted to share with you some layout ideas for star checks. This first one is using the last block that I showed you, lots of scraps, lots of different fabrics, mostly thinking about value, pretty much kind of a kitchen sink approach where anything goes. This next one is all purples, and again, we mostly just thought about value, used red purples and blue purples, pretty much any purple was game. And on this one, we took those purple blocks and set them on point with beautiful setting triangles and a 4-inch border. And then last, here's the little girl quilt that I envisioned with scrappy pinks. You do want to keep them dark enough to see them on the backgrounds, and you can even sprinkle in a few reds or really hot pinks. You'll find star checks and 99 other beautiful blocks in Quiltmaker's 100 Blocks Volume 1. Thanks for being with us today on Quiltmaker's Block Network, and I hope to see you again next time. Hi, I'm Diane Harris. Forget it, sorry.